At its height, the British Empire ruled over nearly a quarter of the world's land and population. Its territories stretched across continents, across oceans, across time zones so wide that it was famously called the empire on which the sun never sets. When night fell in London, the sun was rising over India. When dusk settled in Africa, daylight still touched Canada and Australia. It appeared unstoppable. Its navy dominated the seas. Its trade networks connected distant markets. Its political influence shaped global diplomacy. And yet, within a few decades in the 20th century, this vast empire unraveled. The very size that symbolized Britain's greatness became a burden too heavy to sustain. At the same time, nationalist movements rose across its colonies, demanding self-rule and independence. Together, overextension and resistance would transform the most powerful empire in modern history into a collection of sovereign nations. At its peak, in the early 20th century, the British Empire controlled territories on every inhabited continent. India, often called the jewel in the crown, formed the economic and strategic heart of the empire. Across Africa, Britain governed vast regions from Egypt to South Africa, Nigeria to Kenya. In North America, Canada remained a dominion. This immense reach provided resources, markets, and prestige, but governing such diversity was a monumental challenge. Each region had distinct cultures, languages, religions, and political systems. India alone contained hundreds of princely states, multiple major religions, and immense ethnic diversity. Administering such complexity required a vast bureaucracy of civil servants, military officers, and colonial administrators. Communication presented a constant obstacle. Even with telegraphs and steamships, messages between London and distant colonies could take days or weeks. Decisions made in Britain often lacked immediate awareness of local conditions. Delays in response could intensify unrest or worsen crises. Logistically, maintaining control required a powerful navy to protect shipping lanes and a network of garrisons to suppress uprisings. In Africa, Britain faced resistance in regions such as Sudan and the Boer republics of South Africa. In India, the 1857 rebellion, known to the British as the Indian Mutiny, demonstrated the fragility of imperial authority. Every new territory added administrative layers and military commitments. Expansion had once been a sign of strength, but as the empire grew, so did the costs and complications of keeping it together. What looked unified on a map was in reality a delicate web stretched across oceans. Maintaining a global empire required enormous financial resources. Naval dominance alone demanded continuous investment. Warships had to be built, modernized, and deployed worldwide. Ports required fortification. Trade routes needed protection from rival powers. Colonial administration also came at a price. Governors, civil servants, infrastructure projects, and military forces required steady funding. Railways were built across India and Africa, not only to promote development, but to facilitate troop movements and resource extraction. While colonies generated wealth through raw materials and trade, the economic benefits were uneven. Over time, the costs of maintaining control began to outweigh the returns in certain regions. The two world wars intensified this strain. World War I drained Britain's treasury and left it heavily indebted. World War II proved even more devastating. The defense of global territories stretched British resources thin. After 1945, Britain emerged victorious but economically exhausted. At the same time, the global economic landscape was shifting. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers. Industrial competition increased. Colonies increasingly demanded fairer economic arrangements rather than exploitative trade systems. The concept of diminishing returns became evident. Some territories required significant military presence to suppress unrest, making them more costly to govern than profitable. Infrastructure built to support empire often required ongoing subsidies. Back in Britain, citizens faced rationing, taxation, and economic hardship. Questions began to arise. Was empire worth the cost? The financial strain of sustaining global dominance weakened Britain's ability to maintain its imperial grip. While economic pressure strained Britain from within, nationalist movements were reshaping the empire from below. The 19th and 20th centuries witnessed the global spread of ideas about self-determination and sovereignty. Colonized peoples increasingly questioned foreign rule. Education systems introduced Western political philosophies, including democracy and rights, concepts that many colonized elites used to challenge imperial authority. In India, the Indian National Congress emerged as a powerful voice for reform and later independence. Leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi advocated nonviolent resistance, organizing mass protests, boycotts, and civil disobedience campaigns. The Salt March of 1930 became a defining moment, symbolizing defiance against British economic control. Nationalist movements were not limited to India. In Africa, educated elites and veterans returning from world wars began demanding political representation and autonomy. In Kenya, the Mau Mau uprising reflected deep frustration with colonial land policies. In West Africa, political leaders called for gradual constitutional reform, leading to independence. In the Middle East, mandates established after World War I faced growing opposition. In Palestine and Iraq, unrest highlighted the difficulty of imposing external governance. The ideological foundation of these movements centered on self-determination, the belief that people should govern themselves. The rhetoric of freedom, especially after the Allies framed World War II as a fight for liberty, intensified demands for decolonization. Suppressing nationalist movements required military intervention, censorship, and political repression. Yet each crackdown often strengthened resolve rather than extinguishing it. By the mid-20th century, nationalist movements were no longer isolated protests. They were organized, widespread, and increasingly impossible to ignore. The empire faced not just logistical strain, but moral and political challenges to its legitimacy. The decline of the British Empire was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual rollback. World War II marked a turning point. The war left Britain financially weakened and dependent on American loans. At the same time, anti-colonial sentiment gained momentum worldwide. The newly formed United Nations promoted principles of self-governance. Within Britain itself, public opinion began to shift. Rebuilding the domestic economy and establishing a welfare state took priority over imperial expansion. Political leaders increasingly recognized that holding on to colonies through force would be costly and unsustainable. India gained independence in 1947, though partition created new tensions between India and Pakistan. In the following decades, African territories such as Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya moved toward independence. In Southeast Asia, British control gradually receded. Strategic decisions were often pragmatic. Rather than risk prolonged conflict, British leaders negotiated transitions of power. Some withdrawals were relatively peaceful. Others involved violence and instability. By the late 20th century, most of Britain's former colonies had become independent nations within or outside the Commonwealth. The empire did not vanish overnight. It transformed into diplomatic relationships rather than direct rule. The British Empire's decline was shaped by two powerful forces: its unsustainable size and the unstoppable rise of nationalism. Governing vast, diverse territories stretched resources thin and complicated administration. Meanwhile, colonized peoples increasingly demanded independence and self-rule. The empire on which the sun never set ultimately proved too expansive to sustain. Yet its legacy endures. In global trade networks, legal systems, language, and political institutions, the story of its decline reminds us that even the most powerful empires must adapt to changing realities or eventually yield to them.